Welcome to Read and Think. This is where a book that I'm reading, certain phrases catch my eye and make me think, and I'm sharing with you. First up, Thomas Sowell in his Cultures and Conquests book. Starting here on page 32, talking about the Industrial Revolution, we could see this sentence from Thomas Sowell. The first great industry to emerge in Britain was the textile industry. That's clothes and everything about wool and everything else like that. Initially a cottage industry, that means people making them in groups, families, or whatever. Cloth production in later centuries became a pioneering sector in the Industrial Revolution. The machines invented and developed in this industry, the spinning jenny, the mule, the flying shuttle, pioneered machine building in general, creating a whole class of mechanics and inventors whose skills and examples would prove valuable to heavy industry later on. This means that some of the basic skills acquired when building simple wood machines developed a whole class of skilled workers who had to figure out how things work. That was really starting with the water wheel and a number of other innovations in that era. But what it did is lead to a specific class of workers. We have those in society throughout. And if we think about our mechanics, electrical workers, electricians, plumbers, etc., we still have a lot of craftsmen who work on homes in our physical world that developed in this area. So what we're doing is seeing the notion of the Industrial Revolution presaged by this small skill of pooled workers. So why did Britain become the first industrial nation and keep that position for the better part of a century? What the British had earlier that many people favored was a framework of law and government that facilitated economic transactions. The evolution of the rule of law in the British Isles not only helped promote the internal economic development of Britain itself, it helped attract to Britain, and more particularly to London, much of the commerce of Europe. So what does that mean? The rule of law and its governance and the transactions where people perceived a fairness in handling contracts and transactions, some very, very large, meant that the British courts and the British system of those transactions invited fairness. And other people in other countries would be prey to nobles or royalty or people of influence who would create a sense of favoritism in those other countries, whereby merchants would not get a fair shake. They wouldn't get a fair arbitration of any grievances, or just get plain out and out cheated. So guess what? The money went where it was going to be treated fairly. That's an interesting lesson for today on where money goes and how it works and where its influence lands. Complex and time-consuming international economic transactions, including long-term investments, are particularly dependent on a reliable framework of law. Reliable. So the changes of government policy or of individuals in power do not create large uncertainties as to whether commitments will be honored or foreigners treated on an equal plane. In addition, the fact that the sovereignty in Britain was not vested solely in the person of the king meant that British kings could not repudiate national debts, and this in turn made Britain a more attractive country for lenders. So in other words, what we do is have a notion here that the framework of law is the thing that people gravitate towards, a sense of fairness. Today in the world, I think that there is a great sense of lack of fairness, whether it's in Ireland and the voice of the government, the people are not being listened to. The Irish people are not being listened to fairly with their government. I think that other countries that have a dictator or a government that's very corrupt are not going to get a sense of investment. One might think of the cartels in Mexico, or you might think of a Venezuela with a dictatorship, or other countries, because there is no sense of a rule of law. Today we also see that in South Africa, where what they are doing is appropriating various farms and doing it for so-called economic justice instead of just buying the farms and doing it on the marketplace. So there's a variety of reasons why stability and money goes to stability. And this has started hundreds of years ago here in the British Isles. In Britain, there used to be small markets which were approved by authorities, and that's where you could sell for a certain time, a certain price, and to whom probably. But what happens is the growth of the cities and towns and villages created the need for shops all year round. Could you imagine only going to your grocery store once a week when the store's opened? Today we call those farmers markets, and they have a resurgence of organic goods and everything else. But back then, the idea of having shops open continuously was an innovation. And this is part of the burgeoning part of transactions in the UK and Britain specifically. And the idea that there is creating this further class of consumers, skilled marketers, and other shopkeepers to provide needs for a growing population. Thank you for watching. We continue Cultures and Conquest and more examination of the brilliant thoughts of Thomas Sowell in our next episode.